From our studios around the world, this is Eat Well, Travel Better, the Business of Food Travel podcast. Every month, we bring you the world's culinary tourism industry professionals and share with you strategies, tactics, and information that help make you a more effective leader, communicator, and professional in our culinary tourism industry. I'm your host, Eric Wolf. Thanks for listening. Welcome. I'm Eric Wolf, your host for episode 49 of Eat Well, Travel Better, the Business of Food Travel podcast. And today, we will be speaking with Rosa Jackson. Sometimes the big city gets in the way of what matters in life, like having a garden of your own or a home large enough for a family. Hailing from Alberta, Canada, her home was not known for its cuisine when she was young. Rosa fell in love with the good food in France and moved to pursue her interest in all things related to food. When she lived in Paris, Rosa enjoyed her job as an interpreter at the famed Cordon Bleu cooking school and also liked working as a restaurant critic and food writer for Time Out Paris. A holiday in Nice changed her life, and today, Rosa is living the dream, running a cooking school in Nice next to the city's colorful food market. She is also writing a cookbook on the unique and largely unknown cuisine of her area. Here's our conversation with Rosa Jackson. Welcome, Rosa. It's such a pleasure to finally get a chance to speak with you.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, Nice is one of those cities. I understand you live in Nice, France, and Nice is one of those cities that it's been on my bucket list, but I haven't quite made it yet. So tell me why someone should visit Nice.
I think I really can honestly say that everyone should visit Nice, especially if you love France, but Nice is such a unique place. So if you've been to Paris, you might think, okay, I've done France, or you've been to Paris and Normandy or places around. But Nice is a whole other world. So it's kind of half French, half Italian in feel. It's on the Mediterranean. So you get that wonderful mix of French and Italian cultures. And it's just so beautiful. It's really been renowned for so long for its beauty.
So it's kind of the best of both worlds. You get the best of
Yeah,
France, the best of Italy, the Mediterranean climate. I mean, what's not to love, right?
right.
How did you come to settle in Nice? Because I think you were living in Paris before, and some people are always, the big city type people and can never see
Right.
themselves living in a smaller town.
Well, I came from a place that wasn't all that big. It was an average size North American city. So I grew up in Edmonton, Canada. And my family had come to Paris for 2 years when I was a child to live for my dad's work. He was a microbiologist and he did 2 sabbatical years. And during each of those years, we actually came to Nice for holidays. So I had a little bit of Nice already kind of implanted in my mind and a lot of Paris. So I first fell in love with Paris and wanted to live there. And I was really drawn to the city aspect of it. I was in my 30s, my 20s and 30s when I lived in Paris. And it's the best time to be in a big city, I think, when you still maybe haven't had a family yet, when your career is just getting off the ground. And later on, I was around 40-ish when I moved to Nice. So that's the time when you start thinking, okay, it's getting a little hard living in a big city. There's not enough space. I had a young child. There wasn't enough room for him to play. It was always raining, and Nice started looking really attractive at that point. But when you've lived in a capital city, there is that kind of conflict about, do I leave the capital city and go somewhere smaller? Is that an okay thing to do for my career, for my life? But it didn't take me that long to really make Nice my own, I think.
I bet you don't miss the winters in Edmonton.
I do not.
As much as there are nice, you have the lovely snow and everything, but the cold and
Mm,
yeah, I
it's terribly cold.
yeah, with you on that. Although I think Alberta is a lovely province, but
It is.
Mediterranean's in a whole nother world.
It really is.
Yeah.
Somewhere in I know I had a grandfather who I never knew, but he grew up in Alexandria, Egypt. And I feel like somewhere in my blood, I must really have some Mediterranean because I'm so drawn to
Nice, nice.
it.
So your company is called Les Petits Farcis. Where does
Hmm.
that come from?
Les Petits Farcis is actually the name of a stuffed vegetable dish that we have in Nice. So the story behind that is that I already love Nice and already had fallen in love with an apartment here and put a deposit on it. And I had been to a conference in Montreal of the IACP, which is the International Association of Culinary Professionals. And my son was still a baby. And I was coming back from that, and I was on the train between Paris and Nice. And I suddenly, I knew I wanted to teach cooking classes in Nice, but it all just became very clear to me that the name of my business was going to be called Les Petits Farcis. And the reason was that this dish is so representative of Niçoise cooking in the sense that it's a way of using leftovers in a creative way. So of stretching out small amounts of meat and making it seem not just like something more, but something different altogether. And using all these colorful vegetables that we have here. So really drawing on the produce that makes markets in Nice so beautiful. And I also found it a bit symbolic that people who would be coming to my classes would be filled with information. So stuffed in a way, filled with information and then filled with food, with good food and conversation. And so each student who comes is a little stuffed student in the sense that they've learned a lot and eaten well.
Nice. So I've got to ask what goes in it. You mentioned kind of leftover vegetables, a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
meat. Is it the kind of dish where it can vary just by what you have on hand?
So totally, yeah. So most families do have a recipe that's more or less set. So mostly they will mix different meats. It's really common to mix pork and veal and possibly beef. And originally it was, bits of leftover ham, bits of leftover beef stew. That's how it originated. And so they were transforming this into something else. Now, these days, people will buy the meat specially for the petit farci. And then it may be more meat heavy. These days, I find more people are doing slightly meat heavier versions.
Hmm.
But the original recipe, the meat was stretched out with a lot of chopped vegetables. So the insides of the vegetables that you hollow out, plus maybe some extra vegetables. I add zucchini and mushrooms as well to stretch out the meat. And the mushrooms really add a kind of meatiness that I like.
True.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm surprised you say that people are going more towards the meat because with all the rise in
Mm-hmm.
vegetarianism and
Yes.
veganism, yeah, I would think they'd be going the other direction.
The only reason for that is I'd say when I say recently, I'm talking about, in the history of Nice, recently is in the last 100 years. But it's because if you use fewer vegetables in the filling, it's just quicker to make because you quickly empty out the vegetables, chop up what's inside, mix it with meat and stuff them. Whereas if you add extra vegetables, there's more chopping to do, more extra cooking to do because you have to saute those first. And so it can take a bit longer if you're doing the more vegetable heavy version.
Interesting.
Mm,
Okay. And is this something you teach in your cooking school?
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
I
What
teach,
else?
well, not just that version, which is the real traditional version, but other stuffed vegetables as well. So there are many different ways to stuff a vegetable in Nice, and that's, the classic way, of course, that I just explained. But we like to stuff anything, like little pumpkins in fall or onions in winter, red onions. I do with a red onion stuffing, which is just caramelized and it's got some raisins in it. So different versions that you might find throughout the year. Even, chard leaves. Swiss chard is a very popular green vegetable here. And you can do a nice stuffing for chard leaves or for cabbage leaves. That's quite classic as well with some pork and vegetables inside.
Okay. So I'm still waiting to hear about the Italian influence. A lot of
Okay.
the things you've talked about are sounding very French to me. So where does the
Right.
Italian come into it?
So we do quite a lot of fresh pasta and gnocchi. So Nice was actually part of the Kingdom of Savoy, which was one of the kingdoms that later was unified to become Italy until 1860.
Oh,
So Nice, they spoke Italian, but they also spoke a local language called Nisat. And many of the dishes are really closely related to what you might find in Piedmont or Sardinia, because that kingdom was ruled out of those two places. So gnocchi, for instance, a lot of people say gnocchi is from Nice, if you're in Nice, because I guess it could be from Piedmont. And if Nice was part of Piedmont, you could say it's from Nice as well. So the version we do here is a classic potato and flour, but there's also a local version called merda de can, it translates as dog poop.
oh, okay.
And the reason is that chard is incorporated in the dough. So Swiss chard, I mentioned earlier, it's a green vegetable that grows everywhere here very abundantly. And it's used in many different ways, often to stretch things out. So in the merde de camp, it's a green gnocchi dough. And they're shaped a little bit, they're longer and skinnier than normal gnocchi.
Hence
And
the
that's
name.
why that's why the name. But they say that that name was actually given by people outside Nice because they used to make fun of people in Nice for eating so much chard, and they would call them chard eaters. And then they'd say, "Oh, and their gnocchi is like dog poop."
Okay. Well, that's very kind of them.
Yes.
And I understand you're writing a book about the Nice cuisine. Is that right?
Yes, I am. So I have a contract with W. Norton in New York, and it's going to be coming out in 2023. So I'm hard at work on it now.
What's the structure of that going to be like? Are you going to go into dishes? Are you going to talk about the food culture? Give us a
Hmm.
preview.
So it's going to be seasonal because that's really the only way one can organize a cookbook about Nice. So it's chapter by chapter, it'll be each season and with stories, and it's going to be quite personal. So it's going to talk about my life here, how I fell in love with Nice, how this cuisine appeals to me, and the people I've met also who've contributed, whether they're very traditional, some of the older ladies that are really the ones that transmit these recipes, or some people who've moved here from other places and maybe interpreted the cuisine differently. And I'd like to include them as well.
Okay. All right. Well, I look
Mhm.
forward to seeing that. It's not a cuisine I've heard much about, so I'm looking
Mhm.
forward to learning more about it.
Yeah, it's kind of a niche cuisine, which is why I was very happy to move here and focus on these recipes because coming from Paris, we have the cuisines of everywhere in France that meet in Paris. So you have chefs who come from Brittany, from the Basque region, from all over, and they settle in Paris and do these different cuisines, which people think of as French cuisine, but it's actually a lot of different regional cuisines. And traditionally, people from Nice have not come to Paris. It's not really on their radar that much, and the
And why
ingredients.
would that be? We can go there later.
Yeah. And the ingredients are not the same. They would say the ingredients are not the same, so it would be hard to recreate in a way. And so I found when I came here, I found these dishes that were quite unique to this place. So it's fun for me to focus on that rather than being in Paris and having to choose from so many different regional cuisines.
Okay. Well, speaking of Paris, when you were working at Time Out Paris, did you ever suspect that in the future you'd be running a cooking school and tour company in Nice?
I did. Well, the funny thing is, when I was young, before I moved to Paris at all, I already had that idea. So I had a kind of vision of myself one day running a little cooking school in France. Originally, maybe I thought of Paris, but it wasn't that big of a leap to make it Nice. So I did have the idea, and I actually did food tours as far back as 1995 when I first moved to Paris. And before even I could advertise it on the internet because there was no internet.
Yeah.
So it's something that I've been playing with for quite a long time. And the only thing missing was having the kitchen where I could do it. So
Yeah.
luckily now I do.
The World Food Travel Association is the world's leading authority on food and beverage tourism. Founded in 2001, each year we serve a community of 200,000 professionals in more than 150 countries. Thinking about a career change because of the pandemic or looking to improve your current skills? Consider our bespoke training and certification programs in culinary tourist guiding, culinary tour operations, restaurant and food service, and culinary destination marketing. Visit academy.worldfoodtravel.org to learn more and get started. A long time ago, what's a piece of advice you would have given a younger version of you?
When I was in Paris, I bought a small apartment overlooking this beautiful garden called the Jardin Naturel, which was next door to the Père Lachaise cemetery. And it did not cost much at all. I think I paid 35,000 francs for it. Does that make sense? 35,000 euros, sorry. Um, yeah, because we were in the transition from francs to euros at that time. And so it was really such a great investment. And when I moved to Nice, I decided to sell it, which made sense at the time to be able to buy something in Nice. But if an earlier version of myself had been a little more savvy, I would have gone to a bank and said, "Can I please rent this out and get a loan for my new place?" So I would say, yeah, my advice would be get a little more smart with the finances when
Yeah.
you're young.
Yeah, it's hard to get the finances right. And
Mhm.
I found when I've tried to get financial advice that people are more interested in selling you their services than their expertise. Does that make
Mm.
sense?
Yes, it does make sense. Yeah. I think there's a lot to be learned from books. There's some good books. I was reading a book called Financial Freedom recently because my son is just getting to that age where it could be useful for him.
Hmm.
So, I mean, it's never too late, right?
Well, I don't know. I don't think I've quite cracked that equation yet, but
Neither have I.
so do you have a quote that you're known for?
I apparently I get very enthusiastic, and I say things like, "You'll never believe," or "You can't even imagine," when I'm talking about food. So
Okay.
yeah,
Well, and why wouldn't we ever believe?
because I think it's funny, but when I go to a market and I'm doing a tour or I'm by myself, I am in kind of constant wonder at what I'm seeing, and I don't know if it's the fact that I came from Canada to Paris, so I always have that fresh eye of what I'm seeing in France that still seems amazing to me all these years later. So
Hmm.
it's yeah, I think that I still get amazed by what I see, which is nice for me, and I think nice for the people that I'm touring with, that I'm not blasé.
It's funny. I was raised the first 10 years of my life in the middle of the United States, and cold winters like Alberta, actually
Mhm.
weren't far from Alberta. Well, the same area. And I just remember white tomatoes in the winter and
Yes,
hard pineapples without flavor, imported and just thrown onto the grocery store shelf, and like, food you didn't even want to eat because it was just disgusting.
yes. We also, I remember coming back from France. I had taken a holiday in France before I had moved here, and coming back to Edmonton in October, late October, and already the peppers and tomatoes had some kind of wax on them, and I noticed it like I hadn't before. I was like, wow, I was just at the market in France last week, and now I'm eating this waxy stuff.
Yeah. It's
I'm
funny.
sure it's changed for the better, though.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, of
Yeah.
course it has. When I was in Alberta, we did the food tourism strategy for the
Hmm.
province back in 2009, and there's definitely good food to be had there
Hmm.
for sure.
Yeah.
So, what is with the fascination with prison escape books?
I can't explain it really, except that I like a good adventure book. So I also really enjoy a podcast called Ear Hustle, which is about San Quentin Prison in California. So
Hmm.
there's definitely something that I'm not the only one who enjoys it. So I think that there's maybe this came up when with COVID, when we were confined, as we call it in France, in our homes or locked down. That you have this feeling. I think when you're someone who likes to travel, you love the idea of freedom, and then in the back of your mind there's that idea, what if it gets taken away sometime? And you never know. None of us plan to be criminals, but you never know what might happen in life. And so there's always that idea that one day I might lose my freedom, and what would happen then? So I found the confinement actually a really interesting exercise in that, and one that I found to be quite productive for myself. That maybe the fact that I've always enjoyed prison escape stories allowed me to not be so scared of the idea of
Yeah,
being locked up one day. And I mean, I was also aware that being confined in your home is extremely comfortable compared to what people in prison actually go through.
sure.
So I never felt that I needed to really complain about it or get too upset about limitations.
So, fun question for you. If you were stranded on an island somewhere in the middle of an ocean, what is the one condiment that you would wish you would have with you? One condiment only,
One condiment only.
or spice or seasoning or, anything like that from the kitchen.
The one condiment, okay, I have so many condiments in my fridge that I'm going to say it, you can't even imagine. And mostly, I mean, I would probably say some kind of chili paste. I really like to have good chili pastes in my fridge, and I think they can liven up just about anything. So probably a chili paste.
Chili
Not that
paste.
that I'm such a hot fiend that everything has to have chili paste on it, but I think it's just an interesting way of making food, adding another dimension, especially if you don't. I guess I would have salt if I was on an island because the water would be salty. But I've
Correct.
sometimes used I've used chili paste, when I was lacking other seasonings to lift things up.
Okay. I think for me, it probably would be black pepper if I can't grow the black
Mm,
pepper on the island. I,
yes.
I love black pepper. So, speaking of traveling, what's your favorite food country?
Oh, okay. I adore Japan. I have been to Japan 3 times, and I think, yeah, there's something about it. I think the aesthetics of it and the attention to color and, of course, ingredients, because I'm completely obsessed with freshness. And, the way I cook is very much focused on finding the best ingredients and just highlighting them, which is what they do in Japan. They're also very seasonal. I love their focus on the one dish rather than, a restaurant will specialize in one dish rather than doing a whole panoply of different things, so that they get it just right and they don't mind the repetition of doing that over and over and just doing it perfectly. So that's something I can really appreciate in Japan. I'm next to Italy, so of course I adore going to Italy, even if it's just for lunch. We'd love to cross the border and just go have an Italian lunch, have some seafood pasta, and come home again. So that's a luxury that I have living here too, that I live next door. I live in a food country I love, but I live next door to one that I love almost as much. So,
Nice.
yeah.
Nice. Now, when you were in Japan, did you notice the over packaging of everything was in plastic? That's one of the things that drives me
That's a
crazy.
little bit disturbing. And
Yeah.
also the price of, I mean, I know that they go to great care to grow melons that are exceptional, but when a melon gets up into the 80 euro and above range and can go up to several thousand euros from what I've read, it does get a little bit over the top.
That indeed is a
Yeah.
bit over the top.
Here, melons are, we complain if they're more than 3 euros.
That's true. Yes, I wouldn't want to spend more than €3. I was at the store recently, and you don't know the price until you get to the checkout, and it was
Mhm.
4.70, €4.70 for a melon. And I thought, I'm almost going to put that back, but actually, I really like the look of it, so I'll let it slip through just this one time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
the obsession sometimes can go a little bit far in Japan. It's true.
Yeah, I
But
noticed that in Korea as well. It was just everything seemed to be packaged inside
mm,
plastic and plastic and
yes.
plastic, like four or
Yeah.
five different layers of
hmm
plastic. And I guess it's part of the culture, everything should be neat and tidy and
Mm,
attractive, and perhaps for humidity as well. You know,
yeah.
I get that, but I think that
Mm.
the world has evolved and maybe we need to think a little more sustainably.
Yeah, I think so for sure. It's a really a big concern for, for me in my kitchen too, that luckily somebody just created a compost bin across the street from my kitchen in a little park. So niece is getting more aware as well. And I'm really paying attention to that too.
Yeah, yeah, it's I'm actually here in Spain. I'm quite impressed with the amount of recycling that goes on.
Mm,
I really it's better than in the UK or the US parts, wherever I've lived before.
yeah.
Everything here is recycled, and even things like plastic wrapping
hmm
of packages from the grocery store, like
Yeah.
a pack of mushrooms, right? In the plastic
Yeah.
wrap, even that gets recycled here.
Okay. Okay. France isn't quite at that stage yet,
No?
unfortunately.
No.
There's recycling, but not to that extent.
Yeah. I mean, I
Mm.
don't know, maybe if it's just to make everyone feel good, and you think you're doing the right thing. I know in California, they tell people just to put everything in the same bin and they sort it out later. And someone told me
hmm
they actually have prisoners sorting the garbage out. I don't
Oh,
know if that
okay.
happens or not, but
Yeah.
I mean, I can understand the convenience of that, but I also think that if you're not conscious about the act of recycling, like, you put your metal and your glass in this one and your
hmm
paper and cardboard goes in that one, but if you're not thinking
Yeah.
about it,
Yeah. I think, yeah, I think it's good to think about it. Also, I'm really pleased that they've introduced clothing recycling bins around where I live too, so that it also makes us more conscious. When you're putting clothes in a recycle bin, you say, why am I buying these clothes in the first place?
yeah.
hmm
Now the question I see, the investigator in me wants to take that one step further, and I want to see if they actually reuse those for people in
Yes.
need.
Apparently, yes. They sort them and they reuse the ones that can be
Okay,
reused. hmm
good. All right. So you must certainly have, as a successful businesswoman like you must have a pet peeve in business. What might that be?
Well, as a person doing chores in France, we love everything that's traditional in France, of course, and that's one of the reasons people come here is to experience a more traditional way of life. I do get a little frustrated sometimes with how the opening hours have not evolved. And I know it has to do with many things, the way just the way people are paid in France, and the cost of having salaried employees makes it very difficult to open 7 days a week, or to have part-time workers, or to have flexible hours. I totally understand why the restaurants are open only for very strict hours at lunch and dinner, because it would take a lot of changes for restaurants to be able to change. They can't just decide to do it and do it easily. So the government would also have to get involved. But I do feel that for tourism, it can be very difficult to be going around France and encounter places where you can't find anything to eat at 2 o'clock, or you want to have an earlier dinner, but it's just impossible. And I do go to other countries. Like I was in Greece this summer, and restaurants were open in the afternoon. Even if there weren't many people around, they would serve you some food, And I think for tourism, that's just a really good approach, is to be more flexible. But I don't know how doable it is in France. But even when I'm organizing a food tour, there's the lunchtime closings, and the weird days of the week closings, the ones that are closed on Wednesdays, or they close for 4 months, in the winter, or they, there's so many different closing things to deal with that it can be quite difficult to organize a tour.
You've brought up a really good point, because I see that here in Spain as well. The whole siesta thing, and you can't, to have a lunch at 12 noon, forget it. I mean, you're crazy.
Yeah.
People are just getting up. What, come on. Or being North American, obviously, we're used to having dinner at maybe 6 or 7 o'clock, and in Spain, you don't go out until 9 o'clock, but usually more like 10. And that's just something I don't think I'll ever get used to. But you're right. If you're a tourist, and let's say you get somewhere early, or you're driving in between places, and it's time for you to eat, but things aren't open, or you want to eat dinner before you go back to your hotel, which is another 45-minute drive, but nothing's going to be open for another hour and a half.
Yeah.
And there's nothing near your hotel. What do you do?
It's really tricky. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is, but it would be nice if some entrepreneurial people got involved and tried to figure something out. Yeah. Maybe a better quality kind of, not fast food, but food that, now that people are getting more used to the idea of that kind of meal after COVID also, more takeaway food and things like that, that there could be some better quality food available for people who need to eat sometimes at weird times.
I'm not necessarily suggesting that cultures need to change, but I think they need to be a little more flexible when it comes to the needs of tourists.
Yes, I think. And also you look at these Provençal towns, for instance, that they only get business maybe 4 months a year. So it would be nice if they were open.
Yes.
So, yeah, because they've got 8 months to be slow if they want to.
I've wondered that too, or the August shutdown in the middle of peak tourist season.
Yeah. I think the places that do shut, that's usually a sign that they're pretty popular with locals. So they know that they're going to get the business the rest of the year. And there are certainly some places in Nice like that they will close in August because they've got people coming all year round. But I think in a Provençal town, that's a bit more difficult. There aren't that many people who live in those towns year round.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's part of the charm as well, visiting the small towns and seeing how they used to be and how people are used to doing things. But again, as a global tourist, flying in from North America or Asia, and you're used to certain things. I mean, I think you need to be flexible too as a visitor. But when you're hungry, and we don't want hangry tourists.
No, you don't.
Well, Rosa, I've really enjoyed our chat, and I will absolutely look you up when I come to Nice. Like I said, it's on my bucket list, and I think you're probably the only person I know in Nice, so I'll definitely be looking you up. But
yeah, definitely do.
I want to learn how to make the petit farci, so maybe I can come to your
I
classes.
actually taught a group of French people to make petit farci yesterday, which was interesting because they were all either from Nice or just living in Nice. They had moved from other regions. And there was only one that already knew how to make them, and the others did not. So they were all really excited to learn.
So, quick little footnote here. Have you noticed that French people have maybe got back into cooking during the pandemic because of the lockdowns?
I think so. Yeah, we were talking about it last night with the French group. And definitely there was a chef called Cyril Lignac who was on TV. He did a live TV show from his home kitchen during the lockdown. And it was also on Instagram, and it was incredibly popular. There were millions who watched it every night. So that was one, and there were lots of others. It was really interesting to see the sharing that went on during the lockdown, and how many chefs were on Instagram cooking, giving away some of their secrets. I was fascinated by it. So I think a lot of French people are now back into cooking.
It's a trend that we identified as well through surveys that we ask our members and people that we talk to, interviews and so on. And it's nice to see because it's a way to help preserve the culinary culture. So whereas everything was going to, get your lunch at the big grocery store, find something for the microwave oven, and all of a sudden that stopped in its tracks. And no, you have to learn how to cook again. Well,
Yeah.
why not call up mom or grandma and ask how to make that old dish?
Yeah, and online classes as well. My classes were very popular even now, I'm still doing online classes as well as in person.
How many classes do you do a week?
I do in an average week, I would do about 3 in person. And at the moment, I'm just doing once a month online because I think people are quite busy now and they're not going to do an online class every week. But once in a while, they still enjoy it. So
Yeah.
they're still filling up.
Nice, nice. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. I think that technology had finally gotten to a place that
Yeah.
made the pandemic not as boring as it could have been.
Yeah.
Well, hey Rosa, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to meeting you soon.
Thank you so much, Eric.
That's it for this episode of the Eat Well, Travel Better podcast. This episode is brought to you by the World Food Travel Association. The World Food Travel Association is the world's leading authority on food and beverage tourism. Founded in 2001, each year we serve a community of 200,000 professionals in more than 150 countries. Thinking about a career change because of the pandemic, or looking to improve your current skills? Consider our bespoke training and certification programs in culinary tourist guiding, culinary tour operations, restaurant and food service, and culinary destination marketing. Visit academy.worldfoodtravel.org to learn more and get started. Finally, we'd like to hear from you regarding the podcast. We invite you to share your ideas, questions, and thoughts by emailing us at help@worldfoodtravel.org, or you can connect with us and comment about the episode on major social media platforms. Special thanks to our guest, Rosa Jackson, and thanks to you for joining us. I'm Eric Wolf, wishing you a safe, happy, and productive month ahead.